The destruction from the blast in Beirut is simply astonishing. But Lebanon is no stranger to turmoil and devastation. Experts say this explosion was the most powerful to rip through the country's capital, a city that saw a bloody 15-year civil war that ended in 1990. For many in Lebanon, this tragedy couldn't have come at a worse time. Protests and civil unrest have flooded streets, and the economy was already in a meltdown before the blast. For more, let's bring in Tony Badran. He is a research fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Tony, welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. So you were born and raised in Lebanon. Tell us about the current state of the country's economy and how might this explosion impact it further?
So Lebanon has been witnessing a steady collapse since last year, where its unsustainable financial and monetary policies led to a major financial crisis, which we discuss at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies in a recently published report just the other day by economist Jim Rickards, who lays out all these numbers of how we got to where we are in Lebanon. And it has resulted in a complete collapse of its currency, which is pegged to the dollar, the complete vanishing of people's saving. This was then compounded by the coronavirus pandemic, which further killed economic activity in Lebanon. And now they got this disaster. All of these disasters, incidentally, financial, economic, and now this explosion, are all to be laid at the feet of the corrupt and criminal political elite that runs Beirut, and which is headed by the terrorist group Hezbollah.
And then, of course, last year, as you mentioned, Lebanon saw major protests against some of this corruption and economic mismanagement, which forced the resignation of the then prime minister. Could there be similar protests that are reignited in the wake of this blast?
This is what everyone is anticipating right now, because the rage is very palpable. People saw it today when the French president visited Beirut, and you saw people mobbing him and chanting slogans, calling their president a terrorist, the Lebanese president, that is, a terrorist, and calling for the demise of the entire regime, and some demanding the return of French mandate over Lebanon. Such is the hatred that these people have for their leadership and for the political class that has ruled over them for decades.
And do you think that this will result in any sort of meaningful governmental change?
It's very doubtful and highly unlikely that the political elite, which has plundered the country, is going to do any meaningful reform for two reasons. One is that this is how the system works. It's baked into it. It's a clientelist system. They use this, the corruption is baked into it. And second of all is because you have the terrorist group Hezbollah, and the group Hezbollah has its illicit financial activities, which has been happening in partnership with the other sectarian barons, and the Lebanese financial sector has pervaded the Lebanese banks and has implicated even the central bank. So a forensic audit is going to be a very embarrassing thing, and potentially even lead to criminal and sanctions, criminal litigation and sanctions. So everyone doubts that they will actually do something meaningful. They will try to milk it as much as possible to try to muddle through.
And of course, hospitals in Beirut were already struggling with the coronavirus before this blast. Many of these hospitals were actually damaged or destroyed. So are the hospitals in Lebanon able to handle both a disaster and a pandemic at the same time? What is going on the health front there right now?
Well, with the pandemic, the hospitals weren't really overwhelmed, at least not up until this time. There was a spike in the last month, but it wasn't yet something that's overwhelming the health sector. Furthermore, the pandemic was being handled mainly by government hospitals, whereas now the injured from the blast are being cared for by private hospitals as well, those who remain open, because a lot of them have had to shut down, and there is a shortage in medicine. This is now being mitigated by humanitarian relief from the international community, including the United States, France, Turkey, the Arab Emirates, the UK, Australia. A lot of people have jumped in to send medical relief very specifically.
Well, Tony Badran, thank you so much for your time. Our hearts break for the people of Beirut, such a beautiful, beautiful city, so historic. Thank you so much for telling us more.